over the years, famous demonologists and paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren have encountered some pretty terrifying things. From vicious demons to real-life possessions and cursed objects. They've seen it all, and today we will too with some real-life footage of the duo. Hey everyone, what's up and welcome back to Top 5. I'm your host, Lindsay Ivan. Why don't you let me know in the comments below, what's the scariest Ed and Lorraine Warren case to you? Which one gives you the creeps? With that being said, why don't you smash that like button and obviously subscribe to Top 5. Now, let's get on with the video. Starting off this countdown, we have the ghost in the photographs. In this footage, we see Ed and Lorraine Warren discussing a number of cases where they caught photographic evidence of ghosts. The show was hosted by Tony Spira, the Warren's son-in-law. The first case they talk about revolves around a woman named Gail Martin, who we also see here. Basically, Gail moved into a house and for the longest time, nothing spooky happened. Then one day she was out digging in the backyard and gardening. Her husband took a photo of her doing so, and when it developed, you could see a white silhouette of a ghost.
Years ago it was taken.
There it is. Here it is, Tony. Now, you see that Gail is higher than that woman.
Then we have a second photo taken of Gail on the same day. And again, we see the same ghost in the shot.
Now, as you notice, Gail turns around and Gail is smiling. And because her husband is saying something funny. So at that point, the woman is smiling, and she puts her hand up to her mouth in that manner.
Unfortunately, since it's old footage, it is hard to see the ghost in the photo, like its face. It just kind of looks like a white blob. Now, Lorraine actually made contact with this ghost, and that's when we learned about her sad story. So according to Lorraine, the woman in the photograph once had a child who she absolutely loved. She even built a place for him on her property for him to stay, so he was always close to her. Then one summer he was working at a children's camp when there was a polio epidemic. Sadly, her son contracted polio and 3 days later passed away. The mother was extremely heartbroken by this. So when she passed away, she stayed attached to this piece of land. Now, when Gail started gardening, the ghost made herself known because someone was working on the piece of land that was sacred to her.
Is out in the yard, in the garden, and now you're doing something to improve that. After all of these years probably of neglect, now you're going to be fixing it. And I believe that that is the reason she's there.
The next ghost that they talk about though is not as nice as the first one. Let's take a look at it.
Above the chair, right?
Right above the chair.
Right.
Now this is in the lowest level of that property, but they did have a lot, unlike Gail, they had all sorts of infestation.
So the couple who owned this house witnessed really dark paranormal activity, and that's when they contacted the Warrens for help to get this evil spirit out of their house. And lastly, we have the Providence Ghost Man. This next ghost that they are going to be talking about is of a soldier in World War II. The story is very sad and scary.
His wife was informed that he was killed in action, not even missing. That he was actually killed in action.
And a week later she committed suicide.
She committed suicide, and 1 week after that, he was found alive.
That is just heartbreaking. His wife literally took her own life thinking her husband died, when in reality, he was just missing in action. Both of the ghosts are said to be attached to that home still. In fact, no one has moved into that home since. If you look at the top right of this next clip, you'll see the ghostly image of this man.
No one ever occupied that cottage again.
Now that looks like a man,
Yes.
but we have other photographs which look like a woman.
Yes, we do.
So where you have one spirit, you have many other
more than
spirits.
one, yes.
Moving on to number 4, we have the cursed objects. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then smash that like button because it really helps us out.
Many of the objects in this room here have had dire effects on people. People have been maimed, have been killed. People have wound up in mental institutions because of many of the things that are right in this building here.
Now let's head on over to the Warrens Occult Museum. In this interview, Ed talks about how dangerous their museum really is and the number of people that have died or have been severely harmed after visiting it.
Raggedy Ann doll, which was responsible for the death of a young man who came in here one time, who challenged the doll to do its worst, and it did. Then you have a detective who was almost killed right in this room that we're standing in.
Now, the Warrens had a strict set of rules. They told visitors not to touch anything in the museum whatsoever. This is because their aura mingles with the object's aura and it can easily latch onto them. Next thing you know, you're bringing that demon home with you. Anyways, this is the process Ed will take you through if you do end up touching anything.
If anybody touches anything in this room, their aura mingles with the aura of that object, which is very evil. I would then tell them to close their eyes. I would vision them in what we call a Christ light, make the sign of the cross over them so they take nothing out of here. That's just a precaution that I always use.
As cool as the museum sounds, you'd never catch me there. In fact, according to Tony, when he arrived with the camera crew, the spirits were upset and decided to shut off all the lights on them to tell them that they were upset.
Well, we were starting to film, you mean, just as Rob was coming to us to start the interview, every single light went out. Every single light went out without any kind of jolting, just died. And then, what, 2 minutes later it came back.
That was a warning to get out of here.
So I think it's just about 9 o'clock at night. I think it's
And we
time
should leave.
The way that Ed said that gives me the creeps. Like, yeah, it's time for you to go. The demons want you gone. Yikes. In our third spot today, we have the Warrens Museum. Again. The Warrens Museum is just filled with cursed and deadly items that literally could kill you. In this next video, you'll see just how dangerous and scary the museum really is, if you didn't pick up on that already. You'll be taking a look at one particular doll called the Shadow Doll, or Doll of Shadows.
And there are many what we call death dolls here. The doll you see here was made through black magic rituals. It's called a Doll of Shadows. Now, why is it called a Doll of Shadows? We'll take a look at it.
This doll is absolutely terrifying. Like, if you thought Annabelle was bad, this doll is 1,000 times worse.
It has human bones here and there and animal parts all over the body. You notice the nails in here and the tooth sticking out. Well, these are all feathers from crows and whatever. But this, I can tell through psychometry and through how it was made, that it was made with evil purposes.
So yes, this doll is composed of human bones and hair and teeth. The owner was using it for dark rituals, and in the end, the doll became possessed by a very powerful and malevolent demon. In fact, the way in which this doll was used is horrifying.
Now the purpose is this, that they take a picture of this doll, they send it to you, and they put the curse on the back. You take it and you look at it and you laugh at it, but it's not a laughing matter. Because once you see the image of the doll, it can be projected telepathically to you in your dream state. Dolls like this have actually come into nightmares.
Did you hear that? That is absolutely horrifying. But that's not all. According to Ed, this doll has killed a number of people in their sleep.
These images of these dolls can be so frightening that they've actually stopped people's hearts during the dream state.
Ed then goes on to tell how they got possession of the doll. So a couple ended up getting it for sale at an antique shop. The antique dealer practically gave it to them because it's cursed. But eventually they began to experience intense and horrifying nightmares. They later found out they were having identical nightmares. And one night the husband woke up with huge gash marks on his back.
The following night, it was not only scratch marks, it was claw marks. And very frightening. And they knew of us, they called me up. I went out there and they said, take this doll, please.
The scariest part? The doll can never be destroyed.
You see, you must be very careful with a doll like this. You can never destroy it. If you destroy it, you could have things occur to you that would be horrible. Because the spirits that are within the doll then are freed. And where do they go? To the one that destroyed their home. And this is their home right here.
In our second spot, we have the real-life vampires. According to Ed and Lorraine Warren, vampires are real.
Ed, I'd like to ask you about vampires just to start right off. Are there such a thing as vampires, and can you tell me an example of one?
Positively. Vampires do exist, what we call human vampires.
But they aren't like the stereotypical vampires that we see in movies that are all like, I want to suck your blood, you know, have big fangs and a cape, and they don't look like Edward Cullen, sorry. No, they talk about two different types of vampires. The first being someone that hallucinates and imagines themselves as a vampire and just kind of takes on that role. The other is demonstrated by the Albany case from 1953.
Where the Calbani family had to open up a grave, and a family member had died, and they were saving a little money by digging the grave themselves. When they got down about 4 foot, they struck a coffin which shouldn't be there. It was their private plot.
He goes on to say that the coffin was of antique nature. They opened it up, and there was a perfectly preserved man in there.
And inside was a man about 45 years old, and he was fresh to the touch as though he had just been buried.
That's not even the freaky part. So even though the plot was there, there's a law saying you can't exhume the body until you get a court order. So this process took about a week. And when they went back to the grave, the coffin and body had both deteriorated.
The mother of the family went back and had the ground consecrated. And then they dug up the grave again, and this time, when they opened it up, inside was a corpse that looked as though it had been buried for many, many years, just a skeleton. The coffin itself had greatly deteriorated.
This freaked everyone out. Newspapers got word of this story and it was in the headlines for weeks. People went wild and were like, this is a vampire. And they were right. According to the Warrens, the man in the coffin was a sorcerer and user of black magic and also a vampire. He had put himself into a catatonic state. He was alive, but just barely. Still alive, but I'm barely breathing. And then at night he would leave the coffin with his astral body and find his prey. His astral body was being connected to his physical body by something Ed refers to as a silver cord. So no matter how far he went, he could still make it back to his body.
But while the physical body is still alive, there's a silver cord, a supernatural cord, that emanates from the physical body to the astral body. No matter how far away that astral body goes, it could go 3,000 miles, that cord would still be attached. It's only when that cord, that supernatural cord, is broken, that death comes to that physical body.
So somehow that cord got broken, and maybe that was when the woman got the land consecrated. And that's why the next time they went to the body, he was just bones. Now, you're not gonna believe this next part. I mean, it's hard for me to believe, I'm not gonna lie. So this vampire dude didn't arise from his tomb and go around biting people's necks to suck their blood. No, no, no.
And he would go in search of blood, but he would not bite into anybody's neck. He could take the blood through what we call teleportation, apports. Now today, of course, with all the ways that somebody could get blood, a vampire doesn't have to attack anybody to get that blood.
So vampires literally could be real and among us. They just can get blood sneakier ways, like maybe they work at a blood donation center or a hospital or something. Ever think of that? The Warrens did. And in our #1 spot today we have Annabelle the Doll.
All right, I think one of the most famous would be Annabelle. This is a Raggedy Ann doll that's made like thousands of other dolls, except that this doll was used in communication, almost like having a seance.
In this next interview with Ed and Lorraine Warren, they talk all about Annabelle the Doll and her origin story. So story goes that a young nurse received the doll as a gift from her mother. She lived with a fellow nurse. The two worked together and lived together. Well, one morning, the nurse brought down the doll while they were eating breakfast and placed it on a chair at the table. This was meant to be a joke like, oh haha, she's having breakfast with us. But the next day, she did the same thing. She brought the doll down to the kitchen table and sat her down at a chair. And the next day she did this until something terrifying happened.
But the third morning, they're talking to the doll, and the arms of the doll are on the chair like this. Suddenly they went up and onto the table. Now this didn't frighten them. This intrigued them, to the extent that the one nurse said to the other one of the nurses knows a medium. Let's ask her about this. I'll bet you there's a spirit in that doll. That's what they did.
And that was their first mistake. So they did end up taking it to a medium, and the medium informed them that a spirit of a 6-year-old girl who had died in a car accident on the road by their house was latched onto this doll. Surely enough, they searched this and a young girl named Annabelle did pass away in an automobile accident near them. But listen to what Ed says here.
But God does not allow the spirit of a child to go into a doll. This was a demon who was posing as that little child to create sympathy to these two young women, which it did.
It worked, and this demon tricked the girls. They ended up looking after this doll thinking it was Annabelle, the little girl. They would take it out on excursions, buy it clothes, jewelry, etc. But then it started to attack the girls. The scariest thing occurred when the two nurses came back from their shift.
They'd come home after midnight, put the key in the door, unlock the door, and who do you think is standing there? The Raggedy Ann doll.
Standing there.
Now that doll has flimsy legs. If you try to stand it up, you can't.
Hearing Ed say this just sent shivers down my spine. Literally. Just imagine going home and seeing that doll standing perfectly upright. The doll later went on to attack one of the nurse's boyfriends by choking him out in his sleep.
I dreamt that that doll was strangling me. He had marks on his throat. Was it psychosomatic? Well, let's see.
But wait, there's more! The boyfriend ended up picking up the doll and throwing it across the room, and Annabelle did not like this.
Picks it up and throws it right across the room. You're nothing but a rag doll. You couldn't hurt anyone. With that, Tony, 7 psychic slashes appear on his body. Wow. Now, we've seen these kind of slashes. We've filmed them. These slashes come from nowheres. The blood came right through his shirt.
Then finally, Ed and Lorraine Warren got involved and took Annabelle to their museum. Alright guys, that's all for today's video. Let me know in the comments below which one of these stories creeped you out the most. And now, speaking of comments, let's move on to our comment shoutout portion. I'll be shouting out comments from the video Top 5 Most Haunted Items at the Smithsonian Museum, Part 2. The Bright Side commented, I still don't understand how this channel hasn't hit 1 million yet. Honestly, we're close. We're almost there. So tell your grandma to subscribe, tell your aunt, uncle, everyone, okay? Also, while you're at it, go check out my channel, Peach, and go subscribe. B-Tong commented, even at 1.25 times speed, you still sound better than Chills. I would hope so. That guy talked so slow. Today, we're talking about the Warrens. Number 10. Yeah, that's my Chills impression. Navit Mars commented, co-host Betty Boop. Yeah, that's right. Betty was on my shirt. That is actually my favorite vintage shirt that I own. Little fun fact. She was the co-host. Alright guys, that's all the comments I'm shouting out for today's video. Make sure to comment something down below for a chance to be featured in my next comment shoutout. And as always, don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to Top 5 for more spooky videos. I've been your host, Lindsay Ivan, and I'll see you when I see ya. Stay spooky.